Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about the similarity between the Orville and the computer game called Mass Effect. And most of what I will show and say in this video was sent to me by a subscriber of mine who asked me to make a video about this. The guy's name is Jacobsen, by the way, and he writes, Hi, I'm a huge fan of your work and wanted to share some stuff with you. I know the Orville's main inspiration is TNG, TOS, and well, Star Trek in general, but it certainly take inspiration from other places also. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of similarities to other science fiction franchises. For example, the Kalons are kind of like the Cylons, and that scene in which Isaac saves Tai. That whole scene really reminded me of the scene in which Darth Vader saved Luke, so it probably was inspired by that. So I do acknowledge that the Orville is taking a lot of inspiration from all of science fiction, not just Star Trek. So this guy writes, one I don't hear anything about is Mass Effect. To be clear, I don't think much is from there, but two sets of characters are somewhat reminiscent. Dr. Finn and Dr. Karen, and Gordon and Joker. They look similar, they have similar personalities, and they have the same profession. In the case of Dr. Finn and Dr. Karen, they have similar motivation. Both are the most experienced on their ship and are overqualified. They both could have a better position but chose to work where they feel they are most needed because they feel most stimulated that way. Both never got to stift a family with spouse. However, Finn did have children artificially and later got in a relationship with Isaac. Dr. Karen did not get into a romantic relationship with an AI. However, Joker did. Like Finn, he was the least fond of EID, the AI, but after spending time together developed a strong relationship, and after AID got a humanoid appearance they developed a romantic relationship. Joker and Gordon are both the best pilot of their respective universes. They are both the funny guy and the best friend of the captain commander. They have both stated multiple times they like extra control over their ship, and also they get excited over the idea of personalizing their ship. Honestly, I don't really remember that with Gordon. I don't remember him making any kind of special modifications to the ship, stuff like that, so I'm not sure I agree with this part. Like how Joker liked that new ship have leather seats, or how Gordon have joked about giving the Orville a paint job or using shorts at the bridge. Yeah, I also remember Gordon wanted to have a bridge cat. That's something I remember, and I immediately thought about Spot from Star Trek when he said that. I actually think that would be a nice idea to have like a permanent cat somewhere on the bridge. That might be fun. Anyway, he writes Isaac and EID are also similar. They both ask similar questions and have a very similar sense of humor. However, EID is a human-made AI, but there is a race of AI in Mass Effect as well. And we do get a guest team member also. And like Isaac, the guests also have a biblical name. In addition to this, both the Krogan and Maklan culture is very aggressive because the harsh climate on their home planet, and both races can also eat a lot of things others cannot. The Asari is also a single gender species, and the Union and the Alliance have the same criteria for first contact. Lastly, the official Orville YouTube channel have used music from the Mass Effect series. So what do you think? A lot of it is kind of very generic. Like a lot of this stuff has been used in a lot of science fiction movies and the TV shows. You know, Star Trek itself also was not completely original. A lot of the ideas in Star Trek came from much older science fiction books and even other movies, and so even Star Trek itself wasn't completely original. And I have a lot of examples of specific episodes which took ideas from other movies and from books and so on. And a lot of these things you mentioned are common in a lot of science fiction, and also even if someone came up with that idea from scratch, meaning if someone never watched any other science fiction movie, never read any books, and simply wanted to come up with such an idea, he probably would come up with a similar idea. And this is another reason why I'm against copyright being too harsh, because I think a lot of these kinds of ideas is something that someone would invent from scratch and it will still be similar. So that's why I think ideas like that shouldn't really be copyrightable. You know, the idea of an AI robot which behaves in a certain way, of course it would be funnier if that robot doesn't understand humor fully, and so it misunderstands the things, and that will be funny to us. And so this kind of idea is very common in all of science fiction. So that's why I'm not so sure really if this game really inspired Orville or not. Maybe someone on the Orville production team did know of this game and did take some inspiration, so it is likely, On the other hand, it might just be a total coincidence as well. The guy sent me another email later to elaborate even more on one of the points, and he said that this character called the Joker and the EDI did not really start to get along with each other before they were separated from the main crew and were unexpectedly attacked, but EDI guided Joker to safety and saved his life. After that, they started to really get along, kind of like how Dr. Finn and Isaac start to get along after they crashed on that planet. Okay, this is another example of a similarity which can be a complete coincidence. This kind of story has been done in a lot of stuff, not just in science fiction. And I can give you an example from science fiction. There was a movie called Enemy Mine, in which an alien and a human crash landed on a planet together, and at first they are enemies. In the beginning of the movie, we know that humanity is at war with these aliens, and then they crash together on the planet. They continue fighting on the planet, but they start to collaborate to survive, and by the end of the movie, they are the best friends. And that idea, that exact idea, has been used in a lot of other science fiction shows, in Star Trek, Stargate, and a lot of different shows. And so we can say that that original movie inspired all of them, but I think even if that movie never existed, someone else probably would have used the same idea, because it's kind of a common sense idea. And so that's why I would never say someone is ripping off that movie if they do a similar kind of idea. Also, I'm sure it was done not just in science fiction, that idea of two enemies that get trapped together somewhere and then they become best friends by the end of the movie or the episode. And so it's hard to really say it's a ripoff or even a homage unless you have very direct similarities to it. Then you can say, okay, it's a homage. I think there was an Enterprise episode which was very, very similar to that movie, so I would say that was a homage or it was inspired by the movie. But if someone simply invents a very similar story, I cannot say that it's a ripoff, and I cannot say for sure if it really inspired it or not. There's really no way to tell for sure. And again, I say ideas like that shouldn't be copyrighted, and I don't think they are copyrighted because they are too general of an idea. So just because someone wrote a story in which two characters get trapped together and they are first enemies then friends, if someone else does the same exact idea, no one can really complain about it stealing the idea, because it's just a common sense idea that anyone can make up. So ideas like that shouldn't be copyrightable. Anyway, he writes, also the Geth, the AI race, is not part of the Alliance. When we get the Geth crew member, and the Geth is also somewhat technologically superior to the Alliance. There is also a species from a high gravity planet. They are called the Elcor. They do not really look anything like the Zelean, but they do share one trait. They both have very little interest in the military, despite the fact that they are the physically strongest species. Again, too broad of an idea to really make that comparison, because I think in any science fiction which plays with the idea of different gravities in space, any one of those would have such a character from some kind of planet with different gravity. Even Superman originally, I think, when he first was written, he was supposed to simply be able to jump really high because he comes from a planet with a very high gravity, so for him being on our planet would make him so powerful. So I think he wasn't even flying originally. He simply came from a planet with very high gravity. So this is the kind of idea, again, that you cannot really copyright. You cannot really complain about that idea being used. I do think the character of Alara in the Orville was probably inspired by the character of Melora in Deep Space Nine. I mentioned that in my reviews of the Orville, that there were a lot of similarities. Even her species name was very similar. Her own name, Melora, is similar to Alara. And it was also the opposite. In that episode, she came from a planet with low gravity, so for her everything was heavier in the normal gravity of Starfleet. And so it's kind of like the reverse idea. By the way, in a lot of Orville episodes, I kind of noticed when they kind of copy similar scenes very closely, it's kind of mirrored from left to right. Meaning, for example, there was a deleted scene in the Orville in which some kids run in the ship and they collide with Bortus. That was very similar to a scene with Worf and some kids. And yet everything is mirrored, meaning the characters are the other way around on the screen. As not to be too similar, it might be just a coincidence, but I kind of noticed that a lot of times. Whenever they have very similar scene to something that was in Star Trek, they kind of do it in a mirrored way, of the character standing in the exact opposite from side to side to how it was originally. But maybe it's only in my head, I'm not sure, but I did kind of notice that. So anyway, the idea of species from different gravity planets, that is common in a lot of science fiction. Actually, that was very lacking in Star Trek. I think they only had that one episode in Deep Space Nine in which they directly kind of talked about that problem of someone coming from a planet with a different gravity. It almost never came up in Star Trek, and I think stuff like that should be more common in a science fiction show. And so, from what I hear about Mass Effect, it sounds like a pretty nice science fiction game because it does play around with all these ideas. Anyway, he writes, moreover, the more science-oriented species in Mass Effect is called Salarin, which sounds a lot like Zelen, if you ask me. Again, with the names, it's hard to come up with names, and so again, if you want to come up with some kind of alien name or a character name which sounds kind of exotic, it would be really hard because almost everything you can come up with has been invented already, so it's almost impossible to invent something which would sound totally new and unique. And again, that's another reason for why I don't think stuff like that should be copyrightable. Even names, I think, even alien names, it might happen by accident. If I suddenly write a science fiction story and I don't have time to read all the science fiction books in existence before I write my book. And so if there are some similarities, they might be by complete coincidence. Or they might be deliberate, like if I want to give a homage, if I want to write something similar and I want to give a homage to a real character that inspired the character in my story, maybe I would make it similar deliberately, just like with Alara and Melora in Deep Space Nine, which I suspect was probably deliberate. When Seth was writing his outline for the Orville, maybe he did took a lot of inspiration and maybe he deliberately made it similar. It's kind of a way to give credit to the original, which again is one of the reasons that I think the Orville is okay how it's doing things, because they are open about where they take their stuff. Just like the Kalons and the Cylons, probably not a coincidence. So this is kind of a way to give a homage, to give credit to the original idea and where it came from. So that's why I appreciate the Orville more than the way that Star Trek Discovery is doing things, in which they never give any kind of credit like that. They never give us kind of a tongue-in-cheek similar name deliberately to admit to where they took the inspiration from. They never do that. They just steal the idea or the visual style without leaving clues to where it was inspired from. And he also sent me this photo of something that looks a lot like the Krill, but kind of generic also. Like I wouldn't say this is a ripoff of this, because it's just kind of a generic alien bad guy look, and so not a direct design ripoff. So I would only complain about, a movie if it stole some kind of complicated, elaborate design which someone really worked hard on and someone else copied it directly. Then I would say maybe it's not nice to do that because someone spent that amount of time designing that stuff and then you just steal it. Actually, I think Star Trek Discovery kind of stole some of the designs of the Xenomorph when they redesigned the Klingons. They look a lot like the Xenomorphs, and I watched in one of the behind the scenes of Discovery, one of the makeup artists actually admitted, he said, one of my inspirations is H.R. Giger. So at least he admitted that in the behind the scenes stuff. So I wouldn't say it annoys me personally, but if I was an artist, if I designed something complex and elaborate and someone else stole my design and used it for something else and made money off of it, then maybe I would be a little bit pissed, especially if they didn't give me credit. That's another reason for why giving credit is important, because if that other show or movie at least gave me credit, at least it pointed people to me, it would have made me famous as well, so I would get something from all of this, then maybe I wouldn't complain about them taking inspiration from my design, because I would get something from it. At least I would get famous, and then people would come to me and check out my other stuff and so on. So that's why giving credit is kind of important, and it kind of makes it okay to rip stuff off to a degree, because everybody gets some benefit from it. So if they give you credit, then it makes you famous as well, so everybody should be happy, everybody wins. So let me now go over these pictures. So this Krill guy and that alien guy are kind of similar, but it's also similar again to a whole bunch of evil looking aliens from a whole bunch of TV shows and movies. And the Krill are kind of similar to the Jem'Hadar in Star Trek, and the Jem'Hadar were also not completely original. They also look like that generic bad guy, villains, aliens. I think there was an alien in Star Trek 6 which looked a lot like Jem'Hadar, and in all kinds of other movies, even parodies of Star Trek. It's kind of funny how sometimes a movie or a show makes a parody of Star Trek, but it also introduces new things, and then Star Trek kind of steals those things from that movie or show. For example, Galaxy Quest had those reptilian-looking bad guy aliens, and then Star Trek Enterprise had very similar bad guys in season 3. And so it's kind of funny how basically everybody ripping everybody off one after the other, so it's really impossible to know. It's impossible to know exactly. Maybe this is a brand new design and just similar, All our brains are very similar, so it's possible that if I now start designing an alien creature, and I would think it's brand new and so on, and then I discover the same kind of design was used in other places, and it might be by complete accident. So let me now go over these photos and I will tell you what I think. So this is the doctor character who he said is very similar in the personality. As for the uniform, there is obviously some similarities, but again, this is not the type of stuff which is copyrightable. For example, there are all these lines on the uniform, on the arms and going down the legs. But again, it's something that exists even in real clothing, not just in science fiction. So again, not exactly something that I would consider a ripoff. And here is the Gordon character. Again, he says they had very similar personalities. Again, personality is not really something you can copyright. So just because a character has certain traits and he's an alcoholist, for example, you cannot copyright that. And he says he has a sense of humor. They both have a beard, obviously. As for the uniform, I think the only thing that really is similar is the collar is very similar, but again, real life also has collars like that. The shoulder pads are a little bit similar, and also the stomach area, the middle part of the uniform kind of narrows down as it goes down. And here are the robot characters, and I think the only real similarity is the chest plates, which have a similar kind of shape, but other than that, nothing that really stands out. There are those blue circles in some parts of the body. Again, very generic, not something I would say is a ripoff one way or another. And the robot in Mass Effect has a face, so that's not exactly like Isaac. And again, if you want to design a robot, you really cannot make up something that never existed before. Any robot that you want to design would look like some kind of robot that someone else designed. So again, it's not something I would complain about, unless it's exactly similar to something else, and then I would say it's not a coincidence. In this case, I don't really see a lot of similarities. And the krill alien, kind of similar shape of the head, I guess, and of course sharp teeth, but again, that's something that always they give to scary aliens to make them look scary, so you give them the teeth of a shark or some kind of predator to make them look scarier. Again, that's very common in everything, and so it's impossible to really tell if any of this inspired the Orville. I guess if you notice the similarities, then maybe there is something to it. Might be just a coincidence, and let me know what you think in the comments. If any of you notice any more similarities between this game and the Orville, let me know. And all of this is just for fun, it's not me complaining. I think even if this was inspired, I think it's okay. And I wouldn't want to live in a society in which you are not allowed, you are afraid to do something new because you are so afraid that someone else did something similar. So I think it's okay to do similar stuff. We all have very similar brains, we all will come up with similar ideas, and that's okay in my opinion. So I think copyright laws should not be so strict. And a big thanks to this guy who sent me this information, I appreciate it. And I'll be glad to see in the comments what you guys think about all of this. Let me know your thoughts and we can debate it in the comment section below. I hope it's been fun and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.